Summer can be a bit of a slog. For us, it's often for some reason a rather busy time, and I'm sure we're not alone.
Well, you can beat the summertime sadness and the August angst and enhance your everyday with our excellent sponsor, Via Hemp. This is a company that crafts award-winning premium THC and THC-free gummies.
Each of these gummies is especially designed to cultivate a specific mood. Whether you're looking to get relaxed, get quality sleep, get creative, or just to get focused. If you're 21 or older, you can experience it for yourself and get 15% off your first order with our exclusive code MSheet at viahemp.com. That's VIIAHEMP.com.
I personally enjoyed their grapefruit flow state gummies. This CBG and CBD powerhouse really helped me tap into my productivity. Like, we have had an extremely busy summer, and I feel flow state got me over the finish line a few times when I was editing multiple episodes a day, digging through documents, and knocking out a bunch of interviews.
Via Hemp does not require a medical card, and it ships legally to all 50 states. It's also affordable, and even more so for Murder Sheet listeners who get a special deal.
If you're 21 and older, head to viahemp.com and use code MSheet to receive 15% off. That's VIIAHEMP.com. and use code MSheet at checkout. After you purchase, they ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Enhance your everyday with Via.
Achieving a gorgeous grin from home isn't a total mystery with Bite Clear aligners. Just don't be surprised if all of your sleuthing friends start asking, "What's your secret?" Begin by ordering your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95. Bite Clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces. Plus, they offer flexible financing, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
Have you ever covered a carpet stain with a rug, ignored a leaky faucet, pretended your half-painted living room is supposed to look like that? Well, you're not alone. We've all got unfinished home projects. But there's an easier way. Thumbtack is the app that makes it easier to care for your home. Pull out your phone and in just a few taps, search, chat, and book highly rated pros right in your neighborhood. Download Thumbtack and start caring for your home the easier way.
Content warning. This episode contains discussion of sexual abuse and murder, including the murder of children.
Today on the Murder Sheet, we'll be talking about 4 different cases that we've never spoken about before. 2 occurred in Great Lakes states, Minnesota and Wisconsin, and they have some bizarre similarities, actually. And then the other 2 occurred out west in California and Texas. So we'll be discussing all of these various cases and telling you about them and what we found out. My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is The Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases. We're The Murder Sheet.
And this is The Cheat Sheet, Drops and Duplicities.
Where do you want to begin?
Let's begin in Minnesota. Now, my sources for this story are going to be an excellent story by Paul Walsh for the Star Tribune in Minneapolis. Read this one. We're going to link to it in the show notes. It's rich on details that we're not going to get into. Has interviews with the victim's family member, surviving family member, in this case, her brother. And I also relied upon reporting from the 1970s by both the Estherville Daily News and the Des Moines Register, and they accessed those on newspapers.com. This centers on the murder of JoAnn Bontjes. She was only 21, but she ran her own beauty salon in Sherburne, Minnesota, lived with her parents, Bontje, Jay Bontjes, and Wilma Bontjes. And I mean, when I was reading about her, I thought it was remarkable that she was so young and running her own business. It sounds like she was a very successful beautician and hairstylist and was very in demand, so it makes sense. But I mean, obviously a very talented young woman. But unfortunately, in 1975, her story and her life came to a tragic end. After a night spent out with friends at the American Legion in Trymount, Minnesota, she vanished. So she left there around 12:30 a.m. On Thursday, October 2nd, 1975. And her car was subsequently found 6 miles north of Sherburne along Minnesota Highway 4. Now, the car revealed some pretty disturbing elements. Her personal items were still in the car. The window on the driver's side was rolled down, pocketbook, coat, keys present, and her shoes were also off and discarded on the ground outside of her car. Tire tracks showed that another vehicle had pulled in front of her. Unfortunately, the following day, October 3rd, 1975, her family, her friends, they're all searching desperately for her, but a farmer near a ditch looks into the ditch and sees her partially clothed body. She had been shot in the head with a 12-gauge shotgun. And that she was found about 3¼ miles southwest of Trymount. So, pretty quickly, there were no substantial leads. I mean, the Estherville Daily News by October 8th, 1975, just a few days later, reports that police didn't really have any leads, although they did note that 4 or 5 Fairmont beauticians had been getting creepy calls from a man around that time. And then later October, there's one piece about how residents of her hometown, Sherburne, were, basically raising money for a reward. So the reason we're talking about this is because it's come up that there was a DNA sample collected from the crime scene, from the evidence there. Not sure what it is. Not sure exactly, how good the DNA is or anything like that. But Martin County Sheriff Marquardt announced that it was going to be sent to the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, which is a Minnesota state institution, and they're going to analyze it. And apparently, so far, according to the Minneapolis Star Tribune, many other people have been ruled out of this DNA. So they're hoping that this is the killer. And I mean, what's sad is that her entire family, other than her brother James, has passed away. So I do hope that this can provide closure to him, or at least maybe some semblance of answers to him and her friends who remain in the community. And just, if you happen to have information on what happened to her and what happened to JoAnn in this case, the sheriff's office can be reached at 507-238-3167, and the BCA can be reached at 877-996-6222.
It's really a fascinating time for us all to be alive, because with all of the scientific advances we are seeing with DNA, it is making it possible to go back and look at these old crimes where the perpetrators believe they have gotten away with it. And now we can look at it and we can get answers. And so if you're someone who committed a violent crime decades ago, don't think you're safe.
Yeah, have fun sleeping. I mean, you should probably have not a good sleep anyway because you did something horrible. But I mean, certainly I think most of these people are motivated more about their own self-interest rather than any sort of guilt.
And in a lot of cases, by the time the DNA is tested decades later, as you mentioned, family members may be deceased, and in some cases, even the suspects.
Yeah, that's always a shame.
Are deceased, but their names do come out.
Yeah.
And so we see stories like this in our Google News feed literally every day.
I got a chill reading about JoAnn's case because you know what it reminded me of?
What?
Donald Forrester. So Donald Forrester was the suspect in the Burger Chef murders. He was a convicted rapist who was convicted, sentenced to 95 years, and died in prison. And for many reasons, in my opinion, he is not a good Burger Chef suspect at all. And if you want more information on that, you can listen to our You Never Can Forget series, which is about the Burger Chef murders. But I do believe that this man was a violent and, dare I say, evil person. And he once abducted a young woman. The reason he was in prison for the rest of his life at a certain point is because he abducted a young woman. He and his cousin, Dale Dawson, stalked her out of a Castleton Denny's and then followed her in their car. She realized they were following her. She didn't want to lead them back to her house where she lived, where she lived, I believe, with her sister and brother-in-law. And so she tried to evade them, but ultimately she kind of pulled over to try to let them go by, and they got in front of her, pulled alongside her, and abducted her from the scene there. So just the detail about the car getting in front of her, and the fact that the window in JoAnn's car was slightly down, like she was talking to somebody, just gives the impression that maybe some sort of similar abduction happened, unfortunately. And in the case of Forrester's victim, this is a very smart young woman. She was unfortunately raped by Forrester while Dawson drove the car, and she felt that they were going to take her into a cornfield and murder her. So she was able to squeeze out. It was like a 2-door car. She was able to squeeze past the seat and jump out of the car while it was moving. And she survived the incident and probably saved her own life as well as lives of other victims that Dawson and Forrester would have gone after subsequently. So unfortunately, JoAnn's story, she did not survive, but it just made me think about that. And my next case is another, this is in Wisconsin, but it also concerns a beautician and a salon owner who was found dead on October 3rd. So just a kind of odd parallel there. This concerns the murder of Lynn Hernan, a 61-year-old woman. So she was found dead on October 3rd, 2018. And she was like a beloved person. She was known to love old movies like The Wizard of Oz. She had a passion for helping stray animals, and she was originally from Madison, Wisconsin. But she was found in her Pewaukee condominium. And this is all in Waukesha County in Wisconsin. And her body had crust medication on it. And police see this. They arrive because they are called by a woman named Jessy Kurczeski. Kurczeski is the caregiver for Hernan and a friend of hers. You know, the families are friends. And Kurczeski immediately puts out there that Hernan may have committed suicide. And police kind of feel like there's something weird about this crime scene, like it looks staged. And so the coroner does an autopsy and finds tetrahydrozoline, and that's an ingredient in Visine eye drops. So they find that in this woman's system, and they confront Kurczeski about both the poison and the stage scene, and she claims Hernan wanted to die. And she kind of confesses to giving Hernan a water bottle that she'd filled with 6 bottles of Visine. So again, eye drops, Visine, they have ingredients that make your eyes look less red, but that also, when ingested, can very much, kill somebody. But also it comes up on autopsy. We're going to talk about some other cases where this happened, but it's not like an untraceable thing. So, people are using it, but not very effectively when it comes to getting away with murder. So Jessy Kurczeski is this 39-year-old woman. She was recently convicted of poison. Last year, she was convicted of poisoning her friend to death, and she was sentenced to life in prison. And prosecutors argued that she had also stolen $200,000 from Hernan. And she's told lots of different stories and continues to maintain her innocence. But frankly, a lot of guilty people do that. So I don't know. It sounds like a pretty open shut case. I just wanted to know, because I was so struck, like, people are killing each other with eye drops. The answer is yes. So the Herald of Rock Hill, South Carolina in 2020 ran a report on a case of Stephen Clayton. This was a man also poisoned with Visine eye drops. His wife, a nurse named Lana Sue Clayton, claimed to have put Visine in his drink. She said she only wanted to knock him out because he was abusive. Prosecutors say the abuse thing was a lie to gain sympathy, and that she just wanted to kill him. And in another case, former paramedic named Joshua Hunsucker in Gaston County, North Carolina, he apparently may have been inspired by the Lana Sue case in 2018. He allegedly poisoned his wife, Stacy Robinson Hunsucker, with Visine drops in her drink. And he was careful. He, according to prosecutors, this was, he maintains his innocence, but prosecutors say he tried to cover things up by denying her an autopsy, by having her remains cremated. This fell apart when turned out she was an organ donor, and the donation center had her blood sample, which tested positive for eye drop chemicals. And so that case is still ongoing. And then in another case, this was an attempted murder in Rowan County, North Carolina. This is a woman named Jaymee Cruz. Her fiance sees her put eye drops into his Coca-Cola. So he grabs their baby, locks them both in the bathroom, and calls 911. And Jaymee Cruz confessed and said she was inspired by the comedy film Wedding Crashers. And she basically wanted to, get him out of the picture, and so she could move out and get custody of their daughter. And then one more, a woman named Vicki Jo Mills in McConnellsburg, Pennsylvania. She dropped Visine eye drops into Thurman Nesbitt's drinking water. Since 2009 up until she was caught. And then in 2012, the Wichita Eagle ran an article about, she basically confessed to it and said that she wanted more attention from him. So I guess poisoning him was the way to go. He did not die. I mean, isn't this wild?
I had no idea that murder by eye drop was a thing. It sounds like something out of a later season Columbo episode.
But it's like people think they're a Columbo villain, where they're thinking, but they forget that the Columbo villain also always gets caught. Like, people are trying to do this thinking that this is an untraceable way to, like, pretend like your loved one died of a fall or a heart attack. And the autopsy, the coroners are able to see this.
Yeah, even if there's a cremation, because of the organ donor situation.
And also when you're, like, demanding that there be no autopsy and that someone be cremated immediately, that's a bit of a red flag.
This episode is sponsored by AutoTrader. Credit scores, down payments, interest rates. Car buying can be a numbers game, but you don't have to be a math expert to get the keys to your dream car. Just use Kelley Blue Book My Wallet on AutoTrader. Crunch your numbers and get your personalized results so you know exactly how much you'll pay each month for your car. It's like having a magic wand for your wallet. Presto, the car you've been wanting is now within reach. So hit the road and leave your calculator at home. Find your next car on autotrader.com.
I mean, I don't know. I'm fascinated by this, but I did learn about those are kind of the personal murders. But this is a little bit interesting. In the early 80s, in Colorado and California, there were a number of poisoned eye drops sold at supermarkets and stores in Glendale, Hollywood, Grand Junction. So people were dropping these eye drops, these Visine eye drops and other brands of eye drops into their eyes, and the bottles had sulfuric acid in them and like chlorine and different acids. So there was a lot of coverage of that. The FBI got involved. Some felt that this might be a copycat from the Tylenol murders, although they didn't think the cases were directly linked. But from what I saw, I didn't see any sort of adjudication around this. So there might have been some sort of serial eye drop poisoner running around in the early 80s nobody died, but it sounds like some people had some damage to their eyes, which is horrifying.
Yeah, that's horrifying. I'd never heard of that before. I certainly knew that after the Tylenol case, where cyanide was put in some Tylenol capsules back in the early 80s, after that, I'm aware that there was a bit of a wave of product hamperings.
Yeah, this seems to be in that category. Unclear if the Colorado and California cases are linked. And there was also a Virginia case. A woman from Reston, Virginia named Deborah Hill was accused of tampering her own Visine eye drops, I guess, in order to get attention.
It's a strange world out there.
There are a lot of very disturbed people out there. And I maybe we have a more negative view of the world because we work in true crime, but most people are pretty normal, but I think the people who are not can really ruin things for the rest of us.
And also, you can think the people around you or the people down the block from you are normal people, and that's not always the case, which brings me to one of the cases I wanted to discuss. This is a very, very sad and upsetting case out of California. And the sources I used for it were Fox LA and ABC7.com. And one thing that strikes me about this case, Anya, is that it feels to me that at every single step along the way, the absolute worst decision was made. And at every step along the way, the decision was made that made things as bad as possible. And then another decision is made which somehow makes it even worse. And it's just like a series of dominoes falling, and it ends up in an awful, awful place. So I'm talking about the case of a woman named Danielle Johnson, who lived in California with a man named Jaelen Chaney. Also living with them was Danielle's daughter, a 9-year-old from a previous relationship. And there was also an infant. And it is unclear from the press reports that I've seen if that infant was Jalen's child or if that was also from another relationship. So what happened begins with neighbors here fighting, coming from the apartment complex where this couple lives. And then at some point, the fighting stops, and Danielle leaves, and she takes with her the 9-year-old and the infant. And at some point subsequent to that, around like 3:30, 3:40 in the morning, a neighbor sees that the door to Jaelen and Danielle's residence is left open. And there is blood. There is blood clearly visible. Neighbors call police. There's a bit of an investigation. One of the neighbors is told to go in, and he sees a body, and he confirms that the body is a male, and it is someone who is deceased. And it is Jaelen Chaney. So that obviously is the first bad decision, because killing someone is almost never an answer to any problem. It's instead a start of much worse problems. And then fleeing with the door open and taking 2 children with you is you try to evade the law. That is an awful, awful choice. So she is evading the law. She's driving down these roads, and at some point, it's not clear if she slows down or what, but she forces the 9-year-old and the infant out of the car. And it's not clear, is she trying to protect them or just trying to get rid of them? Who knows? Who knows what's in this woman's mind at this point? But the 9-year-old has the infant in her arms as they're forced out of the car. And as she at some point during this episode, she drops the infant. And the infant ends up being struck by a vehicle and is killed. And so this is no one can rationally say that this is the fault of that 9-year-old girl for losing her grip on her sibling. But this is something this child is going to have to live with for the rest of her life. This is just horrible. It is horrible. And then Danielle keeps on her mad drive, and she ends up running into a tree at a high rate of speed and is killed. And so police are calling it, at least at this moment, a suicide. So it's just a terrible story. A bad situation gets worse and worse. A man is killed. A woman is killed. An infant is killed. A 9-year-old is now alone in this world with some terrible memories that will haunt her for the rest of her life.
It's a horrible story. I really hope that this 9-year-old has extended family or support and that she's helped to process what happened. That's an unimaginable tragedy.
It's a horror. And even the neighbors who have to have discovered this awful scene. So it's hard to know where to begin. But if you're aware, I don't know if this is a domestic violence situation. I don't know what led to this death, this killing. But we're all in this together. And if you happen to be aware of any domestic violence situation going on, or if you're in a domestic violence situation yourself, get help. And I don't know if this was a domestic violence situation or something else.
It may not have been.
It may not have been. But, and if it was, it's unclear if Jaelen was the perpetrator of the violence or if he was a victim.
Yes.
My mind goes back to the tragic case of Phil Hartman, who was murdered by his wife, and some reports indicated he was killed while he was trying to protect their kids.
Was that the comedian?
That was, a comic actor, Phil Hartman. He was on Saturday Night Live. He was also on the terrific sitcom News Radio.
That's really tragic. And just, if you are dealing with domestic violence, or anyone you know is dealing with domestic violence, the National Domestic Violence Hotline in the United States is 800-799-7233.
And never bring your kids with you as you're trying to evade the law. She put these kids in harm's way. She put them in harm's way when she decided to kill a man. And then she puts them in harm's way again when she puts them in the car with her when she is trying to evade capture. It was a reckless, horrible choice. And when you're a parent, your children should be the most important thing in the world to you. They should not be someone that you push out of a moving car when having them with you becomes inconvenient. Although, as I say, perhaps she was trying to do that to help them. I don't know.
Yeah, get them out of the car before she crashed it. But either way, if the goal is safety, then having them exit a moving vehicle in the middle of the road, is not it. It's tragedy.
It's a terrible choice. And I really, really hope that 9-year-old gets the help she needs. My understanding is that she was the daughter of a man Danielle was married to and was in the process of divorcing. So I hope there's some sort of family there that can help her in this awful time. But basically everyone she was living with last week, other than herself, is now dead. And dead because of choices made by her mother. So it is a terrible, terrible story. And with that said, let's move down to a case in Texas. My source for this was a story I saw on Fox 26 Houston. And one thing about this that occurs to me is when people make laws and pass policies, there's all sorts of unintended consequences. So immigration law is very complicated.
Yeah, and I think it's not a very controversial or political statement to say that the system seems broken in many ways.
Yes. So one thing, you don't want people to be able to victimize immigrants who are then deported, and then the people who victimize them can't face any repercussions because the witnesses are out of the country. That doesn't seem to be a good result. And so there is an exemption in the law that says that if an immigrant is the victim of certain types of violent crimes, they're allowed to stay in the country at least a little bit longer so they can participate in the legal process to ensure that the perpetrators are punished. But there's an unintended consequence of that, is that then people are always looking for ways to stay in the country longer. So, well, maybe let's fake a violent crime and make me a victim of it so I can stay in the country longer. And so that's what happened in Houston earlier this year. A man named Rashad Scott agreed to fake a robbery where he was terrorizing a couple of people who are immigrants to this country, and he cooked up this scheme with a man named William X. Winfrey. So this fake robbery occurs in a public place, at a gas station. And what happens is that it is witnessed by a bystander named Jesus Varga. And this bystander, not realizing this is a hoax and wanting to help the people who seem to be victimized, he ends up shooting and killing Rashad Scott. And so that is also complicated because Mr. Varga has a record and shouldn't even be carrying a gun. So it is a crazy situation where people were pulling a hoax to stay in the country, and it sets off this series of dominoes where a man who made a bad decision ends up getting killed. And at this moment, they are trying to decide whether or not to press charges against Varga. But Mr. Scott's accomplice in this scheme, William X. Winfrey, has been charged with murder.
I just want to say the fact that a 22-year-old young man is dead, Mr. Scott in this case, is an absolute tragedy and just a dismal outcome. I don't see how, and it sounds like from your notes that Varga did sort of flee the scene afterwards and he's on probation. That being said, I don't know how you charge that man. He thought he was intervening in a possibly life or death situation for these people. He had no way of knowing that they were pulling off the incredibly stupid stunt of trying to fake a violent robbery in order to do immigration fraud. So I don't see how he's culpable for this. I'm sorry. Again, I don't think he did the right thing by leaving afterwards, but human beings are not mind readers. You can't go into a situation like that and you see a violent situation happening and sort of intuit that, oh, this person must be, it's all, wink, wink, it's not real. So I don't feel like punishing him is in service of justice. And again, it's an absolute tragedy that Mr. Scott is dead, and I'm sure his family members are devastated, but he made a decision to be involved in this. He did not deserve to die, but I don't understand how punishing Varga makes up for this.
Because Scott wasn't intending to actually commit violence or actually harm people. It was basically a hoax, a prank.
It was a hoax. It was more of a hoax than a prank. A prank is more of like for fun. This is more of like to
deceive the government.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, Varga had no way of knowing that, but then he shouldn't have been carrying a gun in the first place. So yeah, the family is upset. this man Winfrey is being charged because he cooked up this scheme, and apparently this isn't the first time they've faked robberies in order to help people stay in the country longer. And I would assume that this is. I would assume that these people in Texas, Mr. Winfrey and Mr. Scott, were not the first people in the entire country to spot this violent crime loophole and fake crimes.
Well, it's a problem because when the system is so burdensome and convoluted, frankly, that people can be incentivized to do something so stupid, then the system is part of the problem. The system needs to be reformed. We need immigration reform in this country so that
and you have unintended consequences because there's a good reason for that loophole, but then the loophole kind of creates a map, a how-to for people who want to stay in the country.
Yeah, I think the the reasoning behind that rule of they can stay if they've been a victim of something, I think that should remain. I don't think removing that is in the interest of anything either. But I just think, when you have a system where it's like, okay, we need to game this in a way in order to make it work, then, something's wrong. And it's incentivizing just not terribly good behavior in and of itself. I don't know. That's just, it's very sad, but it's also just baffling.
It's also a very upsetting case for me, just like the other one was, because everybody in the case is flawed in some way, but none of them deserve to die.
Or be dragged into this situation where, even the people who are the fake robbery victims, I'm sure they were not expecting to see someone get shot to death in front of them that day. Yeah. Again, it's just the most tragic outcome to an already bad situation, unfortunately. Does that conclude our cases for today?
Yes.
All right. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks so much for listening to The Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for The Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.